Yo, what is up? I am going to be teaching some Kubernetes today. We're going to learn just basic deployment on a local machine. I am not a crazy prolific enterprise DevOps engineer, so I'm going to teach what I know about Kubernetes, Docker, and just kind of how the server clusters work from a bird's eye view. Guys, let's dive into the content. I'm super excited. Folks, we're back, we're better. Program with pegs, baby. Let's go. Come on.
And this link now, so this is actually localhost is 127.0.0, port 62006. And I can use that as my way to talk to the Kubernetes cluster. Pretty fucking sick, guys. Hey, who's this guy with long hair? Who's this guy? Guys, it's been some time. I've got the charter company now. I got a few things going on in my life, so I'm happy that I'm able to find some time to build some software with you guys and teach a little. Okay, so let's dive in. I am going to build an application. Let's first of all, I want to talk about Kubernetes. And this is a pre-tutorial. I did have some things I built before. I actually recorded a whole video before, and then I had a soundtrack over the audio, and it irked me because it was such a good video. So I might do some charting. I might find some charting tool. It's going to be a bit tutorial pre-planned, but also a little bit free-flowy at the same time. But the end goal is we're going to learn about Kubernetes, and we're going to do it in a hopefully just bite-sized, palatable way to learn these kind of things. Because when I learn new concepts, I need like the basic. Like if I'm learning a Web3 thing, I just want a like basic thing. If I'm learning new front-end stuff, I just want the basic thing. I don't want to learn the whole crazy architecture and possibilities because it's overwhelming and really hard. So let's bite-size it down. Talk about Docker, talk about Kubernetes, what these things are, and what we're going to build today. We're going to build something modular on a backend thing real quick. Let me just chat about roughly what we're building and diagram it out even, right? Let's find a fun diagram, guys. I'm going to use ChatGPT, the best tool of all time. Let's see, diagramming tools. I've been using Lucid per usual, but maybe there's something else we can use. It's a little bit more friendly to see. Nah, fuck it. Let's use Lucid. Okay, so if I go to Lucid, we're probably going to see some documents of some stuff that I've designed. But let's see. Let me here's a diagram of some cool stuff. Let's use this diagram right here. This was actually part of the video I had pre-recorded, and then for whatever reason, the audio. Let me actually double check while I got you all that there's no soundtrack playing. That would piss me off. Okay, folks. So let's talk about code and as we know it, and then we're going to dive into some code bases. And I'm just going to use VS Code and some JavaScript backend. But this doesn't need to be JavaScript based. This is good for any code. We're talking Kubernetes here and Docker. So that's the biggest thing. I want to explain where the line kind of is, and then where Kubernetes kind of gets into the picture, right? Or at least my understanding of it. And my experience has been with cloud providers, both AWS and Microsoft Azure. And I've worked for many startups to do it. So like maybe I'm the best guy for it, maybe not, but I'm midway through, I would transparently say, right? But okay, so let's dive in. Okay, so we have our code. Let's say we have our front-end repository, whether we're using React, Svelte, we're just hard coding some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or some Blazor front-end from C# or whatever framework, right? Let's just talk basic architecture here of most software endpoints or just API functionality of a front-end querying some back-end, right? And maybe there's a database here, right? And here's our application, or you know what? Maybe this API layer is a bunch of other microservices, and these microservices are loosely coupled to each other, and they trigger events. Whatever your software bundles up to basically be, I just want us to break down, a basic code, right? Like let's pretend there's a button here that clicks something and the button signs up the user gets into the database, and that's our entire application. Like that's what I'm gonna basically water all of our software down to, okay? I know it gets much more convoluted. I know there's many different repositories. I guarantee majority of you guys watching this are either just as good or stronger developers than myself when it comes to some of these things. Okay, so this is our code base. And our code base is getting wrapped up, whether, like I said, whichever language it is, Golang APIs, whatever it is, right? So this is our code base, right? Our repository on GitHub, if you will, right? So here's our repo / code base of all of our code bundled up. It's our entire software application, our desktop application, or whatever, our APIs on the back end. And all of this is going to exist in a code base. Now, my understanding is Docker's going to take an image of this, and we're going to have all these resources associated with it, and Docker's basically going to copy this and upload this to Docker Hub. And this image is going to be basically the instructions of how this code is going to be ran. Now, before we get any more convoluted to that, I want to talk about this example to teach Kubernetes, because Kubernetes gets into servers and things like this. So I want to talk about this example of bananas. It sounds crazy, but it's going to make sense. It's going to make sense in a moment here. So before we get to our code in our application, I'll say your app, right? Here is a banana, right? So when we go to the grocery, and I literally mean a banana. There's no software term. I quite literally mean a fruit that is a banana. When I walk into the grocery store, I live down in Texas. So the banana I would go to, or the store I'd go to, is HEB. When I go to the grocery store, I'm a user of that grocery store, right? Or a person of that grocery store. And here is Program with Tags coming along. Hey, I'd like to buy a banana and I'd like to go home. Me doing that process of buying that banana, I just did so many assumptions. I assumed that banana was already there. I assumed, like, for that transaction to happen, there's already been 15 backend things from the store that I didn't have to think about. I just literally went in with a banana, or I went in with the intentions of buying a banana, and I left and I got the banana. But what I did not even have to think about or account for is, like, let's just say the store, right? Like the store that is hosting the banana, right? And there's even a step behind that. Like, where did that banana come from, right? So there's like maybe trucks that drop this banana off, right? Maybe there's trucks that have routes, and these routes, have like a 4 a.m. delivery to drop new bananas off to the store. And these trucks also have to pick up these bananas from where? Maybe a warehouse, right? And these warehouses have to get their bananas from what? Like a banana farm, right? So like some supplier of bananas. And you start seeing this huge structure that basically my experience ignorantly was all covered behind this line right here. This was my experience. I bought the banana. That's all I knew as a user. But HEB's experience, right, as a store is going to be actually all of this stuff right here. So HEB is going to know the entire end-to-end process of all of this. And they probably actually have like business manuals. They probably have some paperwork, like we'll say business documentation, if you will, to kind of explain how this process works at each step. Hey, we order from this supplier that goes to this warehouse. We get it from these trucks at this time, and we put them on these shelves for this price. Like, we know the entire end-to-end process. And you know what's crazy for me, being the arrogant banana purchaser that I am? I didn't even think about this too. There's other stores and other users or other people purchasing bananas. And they're doing the same. There's Walmart that does it. There's Target that does it. There's all these different places that all order the same product, right, of a banana. or even HEB, right? There's many HEB locations, or depending on where you guys are, Safeway or King Supers or just whatever your grocery store is. There's very likely many different versions of your grocery store. And you have to think about it. It has to be a replicable process to serve, let's say, hundreds or thousands and tens of thousands of people purchasing bananas. So I think that's a very easy way to kind of understand Kubernetes, because we can wrap our heads around. When you look at a banana and you buy it at the store, like you're like, oh shit, yeah, actually I do the same thing. When I go to an apple section, I just buy an apple. Or when I go to the lettuce section, I just buy lettuce. But you don't think about all the depth it took for that head of cabbage to get to the store, or that bundle of bananas to get to the store. All we do is arrogantly buy bananas. We're like, yeah, oh my God, it's 20 cents a banana. Are you kidding me? That's so expensive. So that's probably the best way to start teaching Kubernetes. And I'll start kind of roughly compiling this now to Kubernetes terms. So your banana is now your application, right? And this wall is still like roughly what the user has no idea, like what they're using, right? Your store, I don't really know what to define the store as. Maybe like store managers, maybe like your deployment process in Kubernetes. The trucks are kind of like your nodes or your cluster with the instructions on them, right? So maybe these are like your server within Kubernetes. So all of these together make up a cluster, all the servers here. Your warehouse is probably your node, right? Your actual node with all the, like all the computational power to do it. And your farm, or excuse me, all the computational like resources to run your servers. You know what? Excuse me. Maybe this is your pod, I should say. It gets a little confusing. I'm trying to abstract it directly over to Kubernetes. I'm not doing a good job, but this entire process, if you will. Oh, and then your business documentation. These are like your .yaml files, right? Of how the software gets delivered to the user. This is a rough, on the go abstraction of Kubernetes. But I think it's a good idea to kind of deconstruct the banana idea, because it actually tells the story of why we need Kubernetes. Because when I was a little bit more junior in development, and maybe I'm still mid to maybe senior level or something, but I used to always wonder, like, why do we need this stuff? Like when I uploaded my application to Netlify or Vercel, isn't that good enough? And it is if you have one or two users. But when you start scaling up and you have 10,000, 5,000, 70,000 users who are all doing concurrent requests on different services to your project and using different services as a whole, all of a sudden your computational needs really do demand and vary and change. So in short, you do need Kubernetes. You do need some way to scale and handle these issues. Okay, so that's why I like the banana analogy, because it's a good kind of transition to actually understand like why that's useful. So what we're going to do is I'm going to delete all this. We're going to bundle our application to Docker. We're going to upload this Docker image to Docker Hub. And Kubernetes is going to point at Docker Hub, right? And Kubernetes is going to poll, and we are going to use Kubernetes on our machine, by the way, on our local machine. But it's going to poll from Docker Hub to get that image. And that's what we're going to use. We're going to actually use Minikube, to be exact, on our local machine. Now, long story short, if you want to go production, you wouldn't use your machine. You're going to use AWS, you're going to use Azure, you're going to use GCP, or host your own cluster of Kubernetes nodes and pods. But for this tutorial, and maybe I'll make a tutorial on deploying to Azure or AWS and Fargate containers or something. But for this tutorial, we are just going to use Minikube on our machine to kind of get an understanding of this cluster and how it works. So let's go ahead and dive into the code now, finally. I've got an untitled folder, excuse me. I've got an untitled folder right here, and I'm just going to rename it to something, let's say, to-do app. Oh, I've already got one because I was doing this example earlier to hopefully get through Kubernetes, right? To show the full tutorial. But yes, to get through the tutorial seamlessly, I put in a few reps and jump shots to make sure that this goes well. Okay, so I'm going to do a to-do app, and I'm actually going to call it to-do K8s. K8s is the term for Kubernetes. It's the shorthand. And I'm going to use Kubernetes here. We're going to see some deployment stuff. Oops. Okay, so I've got a basic open to-do Kubernetes application right here. And I'm going to use ChatGPT real quick, or I'll steal the endpoints from this to-do app. Basically, what I'm talking about here, when we pulled up Lucid, I wish I didn't delete it all, but when we pull up Lucid, I'm not really too concerned about the actual application, right? Your app, because it's going to vary, right? It's going to vary from, some people are building something way more complicated, some people are going to build something way less complicated. Your app, I'm going to say this is to-dos, right? And if you want it to be a boat management system, if you want it to be some Ethereum Solana coin thing, some AI system, like that's for you. I'm just calling it your app. Okay, so we've abstracted away from the confusion of all the logic. That's for you guys to understand your applications. I can't answer those questions. Okay, so let me go ahead and generate a new NestJS project. Again, this is totally usable in any environment, right? So all JavaScript things, Svelte, C#, whatever you want to do. But the three things that I think we need for this application, the prerequisite is going to be Docker Hub. So make sure that this is installed on your machine. And I'm just going to point you guys to the documentation, because as we know it, these things change. These things change over time. So there's no point in me sticking to one tutorial when, like, if I walk through how to download Docker or Node, and it's going to change by the time you read this or see this. So go to Docker, make sure you have Docker Hub, Docker as well. So Docker and Docker Hub, I think there's two separate things you need to download. Or maybe it's just Docker Desktop will be Docker Hub, but you need a Docker Hub account. You need Docker downloaded on your machine. You also need Node.js. Again, I'm using JavaScript, but if you're using Rust and you feel confident following along, like, welcome aboard. But I'm using Node.js. And what else do we need? I'm using VS Code. So you're going to need to download this as well. And then what's the additional? Kubernetes. And I don't know if you need to download Minikube separately, or if Kubernetes Control command tool comes with Kubernetes downloading it. So I'm going to point you guys to those 4 or 5 resources. Let's see. Let's just download Kubernetes. Where's download Kubernetes? Boom. Yeah, here's where you want to go. Install and set up Kubernetes command line tool, I believe is what this is. I'm using Mac, but if you're on Linux or Windows, obviously follow those instructions. But those are going to be the 4 or 5 prerequisites that you need for this tutorial. Okay, let's dive in. So I've got, let's just look at this Nest.js project real quick. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to zoom in a whole bunch. Okay, so we've got a few things out of the box. The reason why I like Nest.js for backend stuff is just right out of the box. You get your types, you get your services, you get your controllers, you get your tests. I mean, it's just beautiful. But I've already built a application, guys, and this is all going to be available in my GitHub. I'm going to do a GitHub for you guys so you guys can steal it. All you'll need to do is just put in your Docker Hub handle and follow through the tutorial. So if you'd like to do that, just go to the description and yeah, steal the code base. Or if you're like, hey, I just need an outline of Kubernetes and I'm going to steal the code base as a template, it's totally yours to have. Okay, so in my command line or in my terminal, I've put nest generate resource to do. What this does is it generates a CRUD full end-to-end resource in the application. You can see it's popped up here in this source controller, source folder, excuse me, this to-do thing. And we have our entities, we have our data sanitization, we have our controller, or at least our tests. For the controller, it's all in MVC, or really just MVC structure. There's no view here, but there's definitely models and controllers and services. It's nice right out of the box, right? And here I'll show, let's see if we npm run test, we should have test cases all passing right away. And we have basic CRUD functionality. So here, let me zoom out just a smidge. I really like Nest for this reason, is it's very modular, very quick to build. Now, the things I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to plug in a little bit of logic here so we can just test our Kubernetes cluster. So I'm going to go to my to-do that I previously have built. We're going to steal the service out of it. So I'm going to Command A, Command C that. You guys, again, you're welcome to just steal this code base. Okay, so here's the service. Let's see, why are we getting an error here? Declare property. Oh, we need to change our entity. Okay, so I've downloaded basic CRUD functionality for our to-do. This is going to act as our in-memory data storage. So here, let me just comment that out real quick. In-memory data store for to-dos. Perfect. Fix my indent rainbow. And one consideration is change to a DB in future, right? Like change this to your database, right? This is basically our in-memory database to test the functionality. But if you guys want to really build this out as a production thing, I'll make a cloud thing on it, and then yeah, this would definitely need to be a database. So okay. But again, we're not really worried about the logic. I'm leaving that to you guys. Again, and keep in mind when deploying to Kubernetes, if you are using a database, you need to upload your secrets to Kubernetes as well. So keep that in mind. I'm just going to steal this to-do type real quick. Forgive me. Just redo the spacing, fix my indent rainbow, but this is just the to-do type. And then I'm going to steal the to-do controller. Just stealing all the logic basically from this prefabbed application. And I think that's all we need, guys. And I am going to do some CRUD functionality for this real quick. Let me just ask ChatGPT to spin up some curl requests. Can you make curl requests for this app? It's going to be real basic stuff. Oh, here we go. So all I need to do is just run my server locally first. We're going to run the server on Kubernetes in a moment, or at least the Minikube cluster. I just want to make sure this is, again, you're manually testing your software, and you can do some local testing, some curl requests, some maybe end-to-end tests. But this is making sure that basically our rough functionality is working. So I can already see that this endpoint is working, the to-dos application. I can see that fetching one is working. Maybe, fortunately, ChatGPT has wrote out so much. We see that posting as well is working. So now we should see a third to-do, which we do right here, ID 3. That's my response. We could see, looks like they have a put from true to false or false to true. Looks like, yeah, completed from false to true for that data. Yeah, so all of these endpoints seem to be working. If we now fetch all to-dos, we should only have one of them, which we do. I can delete even the first one, so now we have no to-dos. Beautiful. So all of our endpoints are working roughly, or seem to be working. So this is the same assumption before you give this to a DevOps team or before you go through the developer operation process. that you have gone through testing of the logic and functionality of your application. Testing, etc. Boom, pass the test. You manually tested it, maybe. You see that your application is working. Let's close this server. So now if I do this curl request, it's not going to work because we're not running a server. Now, let's go ahead and start the Kubernetes process. I want to deploy this application. This application is going to be deployed through, we're going to need a few things. We're going to need a Docker file. So this Docker file, here, let's actually ask ChatGPT for a few steps to help me get some command line interfaces, or excuse me, some command line things ready for us. So I need my Docker file, and if I go to my prefabbed application, here's going to be the Docker file right here, where basically it's going to, well, hold on, I actually don't know if this will build from work directory app. We may need to change this to our dist command, but we'll see. We'll mess with stuff if it doesn't work. It looks like our Docker file may or may not be the correct configured one, but let's just go ahead and run through. Okay, so I'm going to ask ChatGPT, can you make some Docker and K8 commands for me? I am walking through a tutorial live, buddy. I'm literally telling ChatGPT that right now. So please make these work great. Boom. Okay, so we need a Kubernetes folder, a K8 directory with a deployment YAML, right? And a service YAML. And these are, again, the equivalent of our instructions for like running a banana farm, right? Or running banana operations for a grocery store. We have our business paperwork in front of us, and that these YAML scripts are going to allow for us to do that. So in roughly the YAML scripts in Kubernetes, they're going to let the servers know to scale up or scale down. Okay, so let's open up Docker. Guys, and I take a nonchalant approach to software because, one, it's not that serious, right? When you're like building stuff, like I met engineers, and sometimes they oh, I went to this like VC meetup, and there was engineers talking about how serious they were. And they made it seem like what they were building was so serious, and then I uncovered it was just an S3 bucket. I was like, dude, no disrespect, but like, what? Like, bro, like, it's not like that, bro. Like, using Pinata in an S3 bucket is not really that riveting. But when I talk nonchalantly, it's to disarm the fear of like, oh, it's Kubernetes and Docker, no. It's like, dude, fuck all that weirdo ego stuff that engineers try to make it seem like it's so complicated. It's like, dude, fuck all that. So, yeah, that's my approach to software and learning software, and I've achieved a few things in software. I'm not the best engineer, but currently doing okay. But okay. So we have let's see. Oh, here let me just write one or two more things, guys. I appreciate the patience. As my app is going to do creates, and I think my Docker Hub handle is, let me find my Docker Hub handle. Let's see.
Yeah.
It's loading. Okay. And boom. Okay, cool. So it's it's going to be important that you guys have your own Docker on your machine. Let's see, we got a Docker container. Okay, it looks like our Docker file is correct. That is awesome. So copy that down. And I'm going to put in this command line here, Docker build Ryan Baglione to-dos K8's latest. That's just going to be what I call the project dot. Oh, oops, sorry. Clear this. But obviously right here, that's going to be your username for Docker Hub, not mine. And we're going to see this Docker image is being built. And we're going to run the container locally next to make sure that everything is working. And then we need to push it up to Docker Hub, which it looks like it's being built. It looks like it's going to work great. But we'll just double check. Just give it a sec to build. Boom. And it's going to run it on port 3000 localhost. Looks like it's working great. So I can now test it locally. So I can also run my curl scripts, I believe, right here. Looks like it's working. And this is a Docker container locally ran on my machine. And then we can also log in to Docker and then push this image up to my Docker Hub. So we tested it, make sure it works. We're now pushing this Docker image up to my Docker Hub. Time for some Kubernetes fun, guys. So this is where the fun stuff. A lot of people mess with Docker. Let's mess with some Kubernetes. You know what I mean? So new folder. We're going to put K8s in there. I need a deployment file. And we'll call it deployment YAML. And then I need a service YAML as well. Guys, I love ChatGPT. It's the best freaking tool, I tell you. Okay, and we've stolen this down here. We can steal this, by the way. Now you could also put a namespace YAML file. There's other things you could do. Let me just, before we just blast through and talk about the deployment YAML script. When we look at the replicas, this is the number of pods. Pods and nodes, they're kind of similar. So if we think about a system that scales, right, you might need 3 nodes to help with the load balancing between, if you have just a ton of throughput, ton of traffic, you might need 50 nodes. Or you may need 1, right? But replicas right here, this is how many pods are going to be created, right? So if we do 4, 3 pods. If we do 3, if we do 4, 4 pods. If we do 3, 3 pods, so on and so forth. But the cool part is pods are these like easily buildable and really made to be torn down really quick. Like they're really awesome. So I think that's awesome to talk about, a little bit of that. And there's so much more you could do right here as well. There's like, you can configure the computing spec to these nodes. And nodes are different from pods, but they're very similar. Node is like the actual hardware, or I should think of it that way, the actual hardware that is hosting the pod. And container, I know it can be kind of confusing, but it's like the actual, like how many gigabytes, how much CPU usage, what is being allocated to this software. So it's kind of, or to the server, I should say. It's kind of interesting to think about, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and make the service file as well. But I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of configurations that you could do with Kubernetes. And like I said, if you're deploying to a database and your Kubernetes cluster needs to talk to your database or to some secrets service like that you need, like you're going to have to put that all in your Kubernetes, right? Like all of your Kubernetes deployment files need to know about these things, right? So like I said, yeah, if your application or microservice or API needs to talk to a database and that database needs a secret, a port, an admin, this all Kubernetes needs to know. So please keep that in mind. And there's so much more. I am not the DevOps king. I will never claim to be. I'm just like somewhat okay at being an engineer, right? Okay, so let me clear. Now we're going to use that Kubernetes control command to apply the Kubernetes deployment YAML and as well the service YAML. So we'll go ahead and do that. So these things are now created. If we now get the deployments, or I really should have started Minikube, which we'll see that this cluster of Kubernetes is being ran on our local machine now, which is awesome with Minikube. And now that we've applied these things, now I can actually get these services and deployments, and we should be able to see the pods. So let me go ahead and see this. Let me say cube. I'm looking over here at ChatGPT, looking for the get pods command, but it's not there. So we see all these pods being spun up. You guys can see I've had some failed ones when trying to build this tutorial. But let's see, to do, oh, we've got some issues here. Cool. Oh, you know what? I don't know if, yeah, we have image poll issues with these 3 pods, error status. So you guys more than likely are not going to have these, which is probably good. But yeah, let me, oh, cool. Okay, they're all running. I was going to say, we're going to have to do some debugging, some live debugging. Like fucking ChatGPT, I asked for one goddamn thing. We're on a live tutorial, god damn it. But okay, so we have our 3 pods here. These are associated to this current deployment. The ones that say to do K8s. How do I know? Because we've labeled this to do K8s. If we labeled it something else, in my previous test, it was to do app, student management deployment, things like that. Now, if I change the replicas here, we're going to see the number of pods change. So I'll change this to 5. And if I do Kubernetes, here, let me zoom in a little bit here too. And let me delete, let me zoom out to delete. How do I, come on, you. Delete that. Okay. Let me zoom in. Boom. So if I now do Kubernetes Control and apply that file, that deployment file, our Kubernetes cluster is going to be updated with our new deployment, which is going to be 5 nodes instead of 3. So now when we check Kubernetes Control line tool, and we say get pods, right? Kube. Why is this not auto-filling for me? Get pods. We're going to see 5 of those K8s. So here, let me do Command B. So we have a little space, and I'll zoom out a bit. The to-do K8s applications, we now have 5 pods running. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we said we want 5 replicas. Makes sense. If I change this back to 2 now, or 3, or just less pods, we can actually see the status of them if we're quick enough to see, boom, terminating. Look at that, terminating, because we said take down 3 of those pods. Actually, we only want 2. So that's what we could do here. And then let me see what else I could do. I can actually do port forwarding to access the cluster. So how do I explain it? Before I do the port forwarding, and let's just revisit some diagram real quick. So your application now is existing, right? When you write code, this is what our code always looks like. It's on our local machine, your app on your local machine. And if I'm a user, I know I spelled local matching. Just run with me, folks, run with me. So if you're a user and you're not on my machine, on my local host, you're not going to be able to access my app. Why? That doesn't make sense, right? So that's why we upload Kubernetes, right? Or we upload our application to a server. And for like, let's say the front end guys, right? You're going to be very, very familiar with like Vercel, right? Or like a Netlify or Heroku, right? Or for the backend guys, probably Heroku, EC2 instances, Azure virtual machines, a virtual machine on Linux or some sort of cloud server somewhere that your code is going to exist on, right? So some server, right? So basically all your laptop is, or your hard drive is basically just a server with a screen. And all a server really is your laptop without a screen. So that's kind of how I like to think of these things, right? Is breaking them down like that. So now if I want to access my application or endpoint, I can do it as another user, right? I don't need to do it on my local machine. So all Kubernetes really is, it's just a cluster of these servers, and it's kind of a weird concept to think about. But when you're uploading your app to it, you're uploading it to this cluster, right? But each cluster is going to get a little copy of your app, right? The entire cluster is going to get a copy of your app. And all of these pods, if you will, they all run on nodes. I don't know let's see. This kind of looks like hardware. No, it doesn't. That doesn't look like hardware. But let's pretend that this is hardware and this is the node that is hosting this pod in this cluster. So that's the hardware with its like specced out, 32 gig CPU thing, and all that stuff, and X amount of storage and RAM. That's what each one of these hardware kind of server configurations is acting as, right? These nodes for these pods holding these containers made from these Docker images. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So let's get out of that. Let's leave the site. Let's get back to our application. So that's what we're trying to simulate right now is uploading the application, this backend logic for this to-do microservice, if you will. We're trying to simulate Minikube running this. Oops. Let me see. Minikube, right? Let me make sure that we're in Minikube. Let's see, Minikube start. And I think I can check the context of my Kubernetes to see which, and there's other cool things. There's Kubernetes dashboard that you can get to. I forgot to talk about that, but I think it's just Kubernetes dashboard, or maybe it's Minikube dashboard. There's definitely a dashboard we can access. There it is, Minikube dashboard. Here we go, and it should pop up on one of these screens. Minikube cluster, but okay, I digress. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, but let's restart Minikube, and I'm going to ask ChatGPT to help me out here. I need a few more CLI commands here. Can you generate some commands for running Minikube on my machine? And I need the -- URL. What else? And I want to test the endpoint whether from the exposed URL, because there's network configuration concerns that we need to consider here, right? The exposed URL or the forwarded port, one of the two. Okay, so what we can do is also to kind of bypass some of these network configurations, because we can't access our Kubernetes cluster directly. We have to configure some access control settings. So what I'm going to do is port forward from my machine to the cluster, so my machine's talking to the cluster, so I can actually get around it without having to configure network access. So that's one way to do it, right? Okay, so let's see. So I am just going to get the service here. Let's see, the URL for this K8 service, which is this URL right here. Let me Command B. So I did Minikube service to do -K8 service, which is going to be the name of this service.yaml. It's our service name, if you will. And this link now, so this is actually localhost is 127.0.0, port 62006. And I can use that as my way to talk to the Kubernetes cluster. Pretty fucking sick, guys. Pretty cool. So all of our curl commands, that's what I just simulated here, is talking to our Kubernetes cluster that's being ran right now. So, and we can see it because of the Kubernetes service, the Minikube that's running. And if I actually do kube, let's see, I think there's a way to see also the Kubernetes cluster IP, but I think that's my IP, so I don't want to show you guys that totally. But okay, so the other thing I can do is port forward, so I can cancel this Minikube service to-dos URL, because we'll get a new URL if we do that, or a new port really. We'll have the same 127.0.01, but we'll have a new port number. So what I'll do is port forward anything from port 8080, which is the Kubernetes cluster, to port 3000. And you can see we're not running a server on my NestJS, the same way we did earlier where we said nest start. Now I can actually use the same localhost 3000, and that's being forwarded to, well, first of all, the curl request is going to localhost 3000, but we're being port forwarded to the Kubernetes cluster. So it still should work. Or excuse me, maybe I got it backwards that we need to do 8080. And there it is. So I did have it backwards, but we're being forwarded to the Kubernetes cluster. So guys, we're chatting with Kubernetes right now, which is so cool.
Y'all, thank you so much for watching. I've got my absurdly large monitors behind me. I hope you learned something about Kubernetes today. For me, it was always this huge, big thing I never really felt comfortable with. But I hope the banana analogy is super useful. I've got the code in the description, so check out my GitHub. Steal all of it if you like. All you need to do is just use your Docker Hub username. And then the other thing is, I hope it shows just some interfacing with a Kubernetes cluster where you feel comfortable with it. Now, getting to a production version, there's a few more things to do. Let me know if you guys would like a video for that. I'm happy to do the extra legwork to get that going as well for you guys. But yeah, I hope that helps. I hope that helps. And let me know if there's any confusion or questions. Yeah, oh, and if there's a DevOps guy watching this, dude, tap in on the channel, teach me something, because I need more help with this stuff. So it would be awesome to learn from someone who's like prolific. The whole community would appreciate it. So at least I know, sir, I certainly would. So yeah, if you're a DevOps guy, dude, chime in. Please chime in.